Welcome to See Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
My name is Amy Nordhues, and I am the author of a memoir entitled Preyed Upon: Breaking Free from Therapist Abuse. I'm a married mother of 3. And since I've written my book, I just really have, tried to have a ministry advocating for other adult victims, because there's just so much shame and guilt, involved in abuse at any age, but especially when you're an adult.
Oh, yeah. And your therapist abused you.
Yes.
What does that mean exactly? What happened? And your therapist was a psychiatrist and also an elder of your church.
Yeah. And so, that's really why I trusted and why I hung in so long, is because he was a church elder and kind of a grandfatherly type figure, and was really kind of like a Christian mentor and leader. But when I say abused, I mean that when I began seeing him, and this was in 2014, I didn't realize that there was a manipulation process that had started on day one, meaning kind of slowly luring me in, making me feel special, making me feel cared about, heard, seen, learning what my voids were. Like at the time, my marriage was very disconnected, so he used that to his advantage. Making sure to talk to me and hug me after church on Sundays, where I was attending on my own without my family. Eventually, as time went on, sharing more about himself, his personal life, which a therapist would not do. They would do in very small doses for very specific reasons. But if there's manipulation going on, they will share things that make you feel sorry for them, make you feel like, they're just another broken soul. When I say abused, I mean I was groomed or manipulated so that down the road he could sexually assault me. And I wouldn't be able to say no, because I was attached to him, because he had played a father figure. I didn't think I had the right to say no to an adult, a doctor, a church elder. I felt too guilty to leave, because he said it would kill him if I left. So towards the end, when, I do feel very attached. And another thing is the therapy that he did was so different, so out there. It was spiritual, but it was a little weird. So I stopped communicating with friends about it. So that isolated me even further, to where he was really the only one I could talk to about the experiences. Not that they were bad, just that they were different. It was like he lured me into, like I felt like I was living in one of those snow globes. Like he and I were in this alter universe that he had created. In order to groom and abuse an adult, there's a lot of the same tactics, that are used on children, making them feel special, making them feel heard and seen, making them feel like they really can't share these experiences with anybody else, making it kind of a secret between you two kind of thing. They play on your empathy, and they make you feel like it would kill them if you left. And they play on your guilt. He began giving me free sessions towards the end. You have to understand, I didn't realize that there was anything sinister going on. So I was seeing his behavior through my lens, and my lens said, well, probably he's not charging you. It was when my insurance stopped paying, and just for a short time, he didn't charge me. And I thought, it's uncomfortable, but he's probably trying to just show me that, because I'd shared with him that I always felt like a financial liability growing up. He's probably just trying to show you that you're worth more, and it's probably for therapeutic reasons he's doing it. So I would just kind of rationalize these things, and it's a slow weaving of a web that then you find yourself trapped in. And then when you start to think about leaving, you can't.
You were starting to say that there was some weird practices that you couldn't share with other people, or you just didn't feel comfortable sharing. Like, what kind of therapy was it that wasn't in the norm?
Well, first of all, he told his victims that we had multiple personalities. Now, I knew that I didn't have multiple personalities, But the way he presented it, it was kind of on a spiritual realm where you could have it and not know that you do. So then we all could have it.
Mm.
I just thought, Amy, do you have any other ideas? And you've always struggled with depression, and this is so different. And I feel like God is blessing this. Just give it a chance.
Yeah.
And so the way the therapy worked was just, for me, it was just imagining myself at different ages where I'd experienced a lot of trauma because I've had a lot of sexual abuse in my childhood. And so I would just pick that age, and it was describe yourself at that age and invite Jesus into that space. And that was all okay. But then there was pray away any evil spirits that were there. His theory was that the depression came from evil being attached to these different parts of me. Well, again, it's on a spiritual plane, can't prove it. And I was desperate. And, I heard a lot about evil spirits growing up. It was something that my mom mentioned a lot. It was something that she suggested for various trials or things that were going on. So I was willing to give it a shot. I wasn't a Bible scholar and I was a new Christian. So I was really just kind of like, okay, God, I really think that you led me here. I'm going to give this a shot. So that's what I mean about weird, to where there were times where I thought it was spiritual and real spiritual experiences. And I was grateful for them and they seemed to be helping me and I seemed to be getting healing. And then there were other times I thought it was super weird. So either way, I felt like if I was offending him, I was offending God sometimes.
I see.
But that's why I didn't really want to share about it because that's weird. Multiple personalities and evil spirits, but it's like if you were there and it was a gradual process, like it was for me, and you took it in small doses, then it became very normal. And I'd done therapy where you imagine yourself at different ages and talk about a child part of yourself, a teenage part of yourself, and an adult part. So the parts thing, I was okay with that.
Doesn't seem like you were out of the norm to go along with what he was saying. And I can see how also you thought it might be a blessing from God because something different and a way to get healing.
Yeah. And I had kind of become a new believer in the year prior. I was attending a Celebrate Recovery and kind of fell in love with God and was sort of in this excited, naive place, and seeing him everywhere, and you know how we can kind of get that way, a little bit carried away, like, oh, and this is a God thing. I just know it's a God thing. Well, maybe not.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've been there also.
Yeah.
You're in recovery?
I didn't have an addiction, but Celebrate Recovery is for hurts, habits, and hangups. And so I was just there working on really depression, my anger towards God, wanting to strengthen my marriage, things like that.
Were you seeing this therapist originally because of your marriage, to strengthen your marriage?
And that was one piece. Really, it was just like I had this depression, which I realize now I think was self-hatred. And I'm sure it was a lot of things, how life throws a lot of things at us and it's hard to tell, but sort of this lingering depression that I never could shake. And I just felt like I tried everything and I tried different therapists over the years and I tried antidepressants and it just felt like there was just something in me that just wouldn't go away and it, like a hold on me, it wouldn't let go. And that's probably why I went. But my marriage was apart.
Yeah.
Parenting stresses was a part. My childhood was a part.
Do you mind me asking? I have suffered from sexual abuse as a young child at 7 and at 5. Did you mention that you?
Yeah, I was taken advantage of the first time when I was 3 and, just developed an extreme fear of the dark that lasted into my 30s. And I was taken advantage of again at 12. It was by a priest. And again at 15 by a swim coach. There was a friend in college. There was a massage therapist. And there was a doctor in my early 20s. And each time I just froze and, didn't know what to do. But in time, you start to think there's definitely something wrong with you. The fact that this happened to me over and over, there's just some badness in me that I carry, that. So when this happened again, when I was in my early 40s with this therapist, I kind of responded in all those same ways. There's something terribly wrong with you. Even when I knew what he was doing towards the end was wrong, I didn't feel like I had the right, to do anything about it or to say no or I realized in this experience and after writing this book and looking back on it, that I had all these things I was believing, and I call them rules in the book, but like rules like people in position of authority don't make poor choices. If something they're doing makes you feel uncomfortable, the problem lies with you.
Mm.
It was like horrifying realizing I'm believing that, I'm accepting that.
Yeah.
And where did all this come from? And so, I kind of went back and realized these were things that I was taught as a young person when the first person took advantage of me, because you can probably agree, it just sort of changes you and makes you feel like you're a different type of person, like you're marked somehow, and like you don't have the same rights as a regular person.
I totally hear you. And the shame I felt until my early 50s over the experiences, and that I didn't matter. What I thought or felt didn't matter, because when I told my mom about the time at 7, she didn't do anything about it. So that means I don't matter. And I believed that about myself for a very long time, most of my life. And so once I found love for me, once I learned to love me, that's my goal in life. And so I'm so sorry to hear that was the reason that brought you to the counseling in the beginning, is because there's no self-love, because you believe the stories that you've been telling yourself your whole life.
Yes. I firmly believe that's what the depression was.
Yeah.
The self-hatred that I developed over a matter of years, over the decades, that compounds. And then when you're told that at a young age, every experience you have after that only confirms it for you.
Yes.
I think I was in second grade. I had a teacher. She hated me. And I loved school. I was almost always a teacher's pet, but I don't know if she hated girls, but she punished me by making me sit in a garbage can while the buses were being called. I know, in front of the whole class.
Oh my gosh.
And I knew that it wasn't right that she was doing that, but I also didn't feel that I had enough value. I clearly wasn't going to say no to a teacher.
Right.
It's so sad that I didn't even feel that anybody else in my life would care either.
Oh.
So I feel like I'd already kind of decided at the age of 8, that this is okay for a person like you. A person that's, I don't know, broken, defective, whatever it is that we think.
I totally feel you. I'm really sorry. I'm all choked up because I totally understand those feelings.
So then later, when I was around 15, 16, I developed anorexia and bulimia both. And I can remember withholding food, running on the treadmill, and telling myself over and over, I hate you, you worthless piece of trash. And I mean, that's an extreme amount of self-hatred. And you can imagine then how that would, lead to depression. I mean, there's just no other way. And I begged God to take it away. And it seemed like he never answered me, and because it was still there. And I guess, looking back over the decades, I didn't know what it was that I wanted him to take, but I just wanted him to take the pain. And I didn't know how to address it because I didn't really grasp it. But so I eventually decided that he couldn't answer you. And so that caused a lot of anger for me, along with the abuse in the churches and my abuse by a priest, and then my sister passing at a young age, and just everything. So by the time I reached this early 40s, when I started Celebrate Recovery, I was full of anger towards God, just absolute, I'm done with you. I don't get you. And so I had just worked through that and found healing there when I started working with this therapist. So
do you now have self-love? Are you working towards it? Where are you in how you view yourself?
yes, I wrote my book over a period of years. And, one of the first things that helped me was kind of recognizing, I called them rules, but like these negative tapes, realizing that was huge. And then what really helped me and brought the healing was I knew, what scripture said. I knew God loved me and that I was cherished in his eyes. But literally at the time, it felt like yada, yada, yada. It felt like nothing to me. Like, I know, but I don't feel it.
Yeah.
but I knew scripture didn't lie. So I began writing love letters to myself from God in the form of poetry, just because I like to write. And I just poured out his love for me. And I just counteracted it, with, but look what I did. Like, look what a terrible person I am. But, all the buts, but. And I just kept speaking to myself as he would, not how I felt, but how I knew he would, because scripture tells me, and scripture doesn't lie. And I did that over and over and over. I must have 20 or 30 poems I wrote. And eventually I could feel a shift and the self-hatred start to lessen. And his words really started to penetrate for the very first time. Working on my issues in Celebrate Recovery, I knew that he was present and that he could hear me and those kind of things. But his love for me, I had never felt. And he used this trauma actually with this doctor to really help me experience that for the first time, because when I got out of this abuse, I was so devastated, because not only had I been betrayed and misused and really treated like garbage, I also felt like, did I participate? I hate myself because I don't understand why I would not have left sooner. I hate myself for not seeing it, or for allowing it, or however you want to call it. And so I just didn't think I could survive it. And so I clung to God just with all of my being, because he was the only one I trusted. And I just was really saying, God, please take me to heaven. I can't deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
This is too big. I don't want to tell anyone, and I can't get over it. So just please take me to heaven. And that's kind of where I was. And he just began pouring out his love for me in really cool ways that I talk about in the book. And so that is where I started, to feel that for the first time. But then my self-hatred was just bigger. And so that's where the writing came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kept kind of arguing with myself, with speaking for God. And that did produce a shift.
That's really beautiful.
The answer is yes, I do feel self-love. I do not feel at fault for what happened, and I do not feel shame for what happened.
I felt shame for my whole life, because even though I was 7, I felt like I participated, like I didn't jump right up and scream. Because I didn't jump right up and scream, that it was my fault.
Recently, I was talking with another victim who was dealing with their shame, and their confusion was, and they were only a teenager, but their confusion was, but physically, maybe I kind of liked it, but I didn't want to do it. And I was horrified by it. And I said, that is absolutely a physiological response that is out of your control.
Right.
And that adds another layer of confusion and guilt and shame for people. Our bodies are wired this way.
Right. A counselor told me that just a couple of years ago, and I'm 54. So I was 7, and I carried that for so long. I never shared it, that my body responded in a positive way, that was the shame, that I seemed to be enjoying it.
Right.
My body was responding physically. And she said, your body's made to respond. You didn't do anything wrong. And I really heard her, and I'm so thankful for that. How is your book being received?
It's been really wonderful. I mean, I have to remind myself, success is in the people that have been impacted, not in the numbers or, sales or anything like that, because I've had so many people reach out to me saying, I feel so much better. I feel less alone. Maybe, just maybe, I can forgive myself. And that's why I wrote it, because we don't understand even what happened to us.
Right.
You come out like, what did I just go through? And to be able to, read it in a way you can understand it and say, that is what happened. That's exactly kind of, same words, same things. That's the same pattern. And it's like a playbook that these sociopaths use and these predators use. And it gives them the feeling that there's a ton of us, and there is a ton of adult victims out there. I have this program that tells me, it's for authors finding what keywords to use when you list your book on Amazon. And I think I typed in therapists who abuse women. There were over 6,000 searches a month for those words just in Amazon books. There was another one, can adults be victims? 6,000 people in a month typed that in. So there's just people that are just longing to know if they can forgive themselves for this and what their role was and how did it happen. And if they're intelligent, like I felt like if you're intelligent, how could you not catch it? And how could you fall for it? And, these predators use our childhood wounds against us because I felt like growing up that I was too emotional and too needy. And if I wasn't those things, then I wouldn't crave attachment or crave closeness or crave a father figure, that those were all flaws. So then when they use that and they start to fill a void, say for me, it was a father figure or just the closeness or connection, you feel like you're such a loser for enjoying that, enjoying having a father figure, in other words, you're an adult. What's wrong with you? But these are basic human needs. There isn't anything wrong with them, but it's kind of embarrassing and shameful when you are our age and that feels good to you.
I have put myself in terrible situations with men allowing like the very minimum, like I just get it because I believed what I deserved was the bottom.
Yeah.
And allowed that to happen my whole adult life. And so I know that it happens as an adult because you believe the stories about yourself. You just believe that's what you're worth. And so that's why my goal is that women find their self-worth. And it's just such a precious life that we have. And so I'm so glad that you are finding that. I love the way you found it. If other people are going through this, what kind of tools do you suggest? Are you willing to trust a counselor now or therapist? What are some tools you are doing to help you?
I did have to decide to trust therapists again because we know if we've experienced anything like this, the trauma is so huge and well-meaning friends and family just can't do it, can't provide the support we need. So
right.
I ended up finding a psychologist who did EMDR, which I highly recommend for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for a year. And then it's like the trauma I talk about an earthquake having aftershocks. There were like wave upon wave that kept coming. And so like say a year later, my marriage and my family was just absolutely suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And so I sought out a therapist again, just to help me during that time period. So I do recommend it because not all therapists are sociopaths.
Right.
Then as far as other tools, in the beginning, I just wanted to know that I wasn't the only one on the planet. So I read every book I could find, and there's not a lot on therapist abuse, but every book I could find, I reached out to an organization called TELL, which is for adult therapist and clergy abuse. And you can email them and they'll email you back. Several different women will email you back. And I just was so comforted the fact that it wasn't just me and that these were successful, intelligent, wonderful women who were also duped. And so, it started to sink in that it's not just something weird or bad about me. And so really finding people who get it is huge because you will be re-victimized if you share with people that don't get it. Even if they're loving
right.
and they mean well, they're going to ask questions that are hurtful. People that are wondering how can they support a victim, I just like to tell them you can empathize with the pain and the betrayal and the guilt and the anger. You can empathize with all of those, but don't try to understand it. Don't ask questions to try to understand it because you can inadvertently really shame the victim again. A few people asked me like, well, did you think about leaving? It's like human nature to want to ask that. That is the pain that we are wrestling with. And so, we really need a trained therapist who understands what to ask.
What other questions were you asked that hurt you?
Another piece I haven't mentioned is I did decide to stand up for myself. So I reported to the medical board, and that was a scary but a healing experience. And then later I decided to file a civil suit because therapist abuse is not illegal in my state. It's illegal in 32 states. And so to answer your question, the first attorney that I talked to was so cruel and just was very condescending and, well, why did you go back? And I was just devastated. And that almost stopped me for good. You have to find an attorney, obviously, who gets this type of abuse. And there are a lot of good ones out there, but just questions like that. And
yeah,
that's what everybody's thinking. And believe me, we're asking the same question of ourselves. There's no one harder on ourselves than us. So we don't need any other help from anybody else.
Well, I have to say that the messed up part of my brain at first thought, but he made you feel special. Like, I get that that's what makes you keep going back. I understand that the part of me that would also have gone back, like I'm saying, in a few relationships that were so terrible and I stayed. It's the same thing. Like,
yeah,
I deserved so much better, but didn't think I did.
And it's the back and forth, it's the, well, it was good when it was good.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, you think, well, this will never happen again. And they're very deeply sorry. And, he didn't make any major moves for a very long time. So it was very slow. And the thing is, they were so spread apart that I didn't link any of them together.
I see.
It wasn't until I got out and I was analyzing it that I thought I was trying to link it back, and I linked it back to December. And when I was sharing this with an attorney who got it, she said, "Oh no, it didn't start in December. It started on day one." And then I started thinking, well, yeah, you're right. Because like on day one, when I came in, now he's a goofy kind of a character. So this kind of was fitting for him, but he like looked at the clothing I was wearing and then went to a cabinet and looked at all these Afghans he had in there and then pretended to pick one that matched what I was wearing and covered me up with it, which is weird. But for him, and he does it in kind of a goofy way, I didn't necessarily see it as sinister. Well, that was the beginning. That was the beginning of grooming on day one, coming into my personal space.
I see.
An ethical therapist would say, "Oh, are you cold? Would you like an Afghan?" Well, there's some right there, or they'll hand you one.
Yeah.
But see, they do that right away because it throws you off. And then other things aren't so weird.
Yeah, I get that.
It's not like it's normal and then all of a sudden they make a move. They start out that way from day one. So you can't really figure out. It's like you don't have something to compare it to.
Yeah. Even as a photographer, I'm often having to help women with their clothing or something. And I ask, is it okay to come help you to get near you in this space?
But if you just kind of barged in and did that, they might feel a little weird, but then they'd get accepted to it and they'd be like, that's just how you are. It's not a big deal.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, totally see that. Do you mind if I ask, are you still married? How did your marriage work out?
Yes, my marriage is doing amazingly well, but I will say this trauma, it was like a wake-up call, especially for my husband. He'd been very shut down emotionally, very not present. And he was kind of like, where have I been? And I'll tell you how disconnected we were. I don't even know if I told him I was seeing a therapist because I didn't think that was information he necessarily wasn't even interested in.
Yeah.
In my book, I talk about, I would tell him things about my personal life, but they would be things that he would have to pause the TV remote to hear, and it would take far too much time. That's kind of where we were. It was like we talked about the kids, basics, that was it.
Yeah.
And so it shattered our marriage down to rubble. And there was a lot of pain that I had to go through there. I mean, he originally, in his shock, took it like I had an affair, but he pretty quickly realized that that's absolutely not what happened. It wasn't something I wanted. It's not something I would ever do. This is like a grandfather. He knew that I had a void there for a father figure. And so it took time, but we mended. But the cool thing is that kind of when you're starting at the bare bottom, there's kind of nowhere to go but up. And I felt like God used it to rebuild our marriage into something stronger than we'd even had when we got married, than we'd ever had. And we're closer now and healthier now. I wish we could have had that before my children were born, but I feel like it's a blessing at any stage. And it's cool that they're able to see how you can endure something like this and come out stronger for it.
I love that. Did you win your civil suit?
I did. And the medical board, before that, they allowed him to surrender his license. And I learned after that it was only the 5th permanent surrender of license in 20 years. So with the medical board, if you lose your license, you can reapply after 1 year. But in my case, it was permanently in the state, never again. He reapplied. He was of retirement age, so it wasn't a huge victory, but it was something. It was standing up for myself, which was huge.
Yeah.
And it was having other people, strangers, fight for me that I just I was just blown away that people would want to,
Mm-hmm.
and that, again, like I meant that much. And no other victims came forward for a very long time. And I felt kind of embarrassed and alone in that. But then it dawned on me that I really think God wanted me to be the only one, because he wanted me to see that even if it was only me, he should have lost his license, and that it was enough. If it was just me, it was enough. Because after that concluded, I didn't win anything. Another victim did come forward, and then we pursued a civil suit, and we were successful in that. But again, it's not really about the doctor. It's just really about his insurance company. It's not the justice that maybe you really want, but it's, again, something. It's standing up and saying, this isn't okay. You cannot do this to people. That's what it was about for me.
And I really love that you see that you were all that mattered, that it happened to you was all that mattered. I really love that.
I know I sat in that medical board meeting and listened to the doctors bantering about, should they allow him to surrender it, or should they make him face a trial and take it, which was another option. And they had already asked me, would you testify if it went to trial? And I said I would. It would be terrifying, but I would. And just to hear this one doctor saying, I'm not agreeing to this. This isn't the worst thing we can do to him. We need to demand a trial and make him sit here, and then we need to take his license. That's what we need to do. And they all said, well, I know, but remember when we did that last time and there were 10 victims, and then when it came time, all 10 of them didn't want to testify, and we only have one victim. We can't risk that. And then he said, well, I won't agree to this unless we report this to the local DA. And they said, well, we don't have criminal jurisdiction. And just to hear that he was outraged, I couldn't believe it. And I knew that was God. I just knew that was God speaking to me and showing me, this is how I feel about it too. And even if it's just you, it can be you or it could be 100, either way.
That's beautiful. One thing that stands out to me that you said was that at first your husband felt like it was an affair. I wonder how many rape victims go through that their partners are mad at them rather than feeling like they're victims.
Oh, I think it's really common.
Yeah.
And I've had victims who've read my book or my website and come to me and say, I'm never going to tell my husband. He won't believe me. And it's just so sad because it's such a heavy secret to bear.
Mm-hmm.
And to never really be free of that. But I get it, because I had the same fear. I didn't want to tell anybody. I didn't want to tell anyone on the planet.
Yeah.
One thing that was helpful to me was a psychologist that asked me if I had shared everything with my husband yet. And I said, yes, I told him everything. And he said, well, that's too bad, because the first thing I do in this situation, when I sit down with couples, is inform the spouse that your wife was a victim of a crime, a victim of a felony. And do victims of crimes owe explanations to anyone about the nature of the crime? No, we shouldn't have to say anything. People should be asking us, what can we do for you? But adults don't get that opportunity. That doesn't apply to us.
Right. So we're kind of double shamed.
Yes, we are shamed for what happened to us, and we're shamed when we tell.
Yeah.
I've heard so many stories. It's so sad within churches that the woman is the woman that led the pastor to sin.
Mm.
It's just, don't get me started.
When I finally had the counseling just a couple of years ago and was free to talk about it because I was no longer full of shame, the person who abused me was my sister's boyfriend at the time. He was 14 and I was 7. And I put that out there, and she got so angry at me. And so now when I relate the story, I usually leave that part out, but it was her shame as well, which I hadn't really taken into consideration, and also still don't think it changes anything for me, that I should be able to talk about the experience, because like you're doing, it's healing for others to hear that you can get through it. What I want to know though is, does any of your family members not want you to discuss it because they have shame about it?
I don't think it makes my mom particularly comfortable.
Yeah.
But I don't think that she feels angry or disappointed with me for talking about it. If she were being really honest, she would probably rather not, because maybe it reflects back on her in some way.
Yeah, that's what I guess I'm saying, is that it's reflecting on my sister, yet it happened to me.
But I'd have to ask her that. I don't know. She did feel like because I shared about it and the way I told the story, she felt like I was blaming her, that she had to have failed me in some way, that these things happened to me. That's absolutely not the case.
Now that you say that, maybe my sister being upset is about her shame for not being protective of me. So I see it a little bit differently now that you say that. Like, how does this reflect on her?
Yes.
Yeah, I see that. Well, and like you, I don't hold her responsible at all.
Even when you come forward with someone, who has abused many people or even just one, but they're typically well loved and hold high positions because they need that before they can take advantage of people. They need to have already groomed everyone around them to be this loving, charismatic, wonderful person so that if someone does come forward, they're not believed. But what happens then when you come forward is that all those people that love that person are angry to have their little bubble shattered, and they're offended that you're suggesting that they didn't see it and that they love and support a predator. And, that's not really our problem.
I see. Yeah.
That's their emotions and theirs to deal with.
Yeah.
That's not exactly the same with your sister, but however she's feeling, that's what she needs to work through. Back to like on a larger scale, it's like, I'm sorry that this makes you uncomfortable. All of you that need to now reevaluate why you trusted this person but again, whether they believe me or not my problem.
Yeah.
I know God knows the truth and my spouse knows the truth and the few people I let in my inner circle understand. And I don't need to worry about anybody else.
One thing I heard recently, that the most important thing is to believe the victim. You know how, well, she dressed sexually, so of course she deserves it, those kind of things. So you don't believe that you were a victim. Like you're saying, somebody asked you, well, why did you keep going back? Like our first instinct is not believing.
I know. Or we want to know, well, okay, so what did you do to make that happen?
Right. Just like somebody wearing a short dress means that when they were raped, well, of course they were, which is ridiculous.
I know.
Really, we need to learn how to better support people who have been victimized. And you were, from a very young age, perfectly groomed for this because over and over and over, you didn't believe you were worthy of anything more than what was happening.
Yeah. As far as believing victims, people have to understand by listening to us and learning from us how much risk there is involved for us to come forward.
Right.
I had to risk losing my marriage, my family, my church, my reputation, my friends, everything. You lose so much. And all we're hoping to gain is to heal from the crushing shame and hurt and betrayal. That's the only reason we're coming forward, is because our options are suffer in silence or come forward and suffer and hopefully get through it and come to the other side. I just get so enraged when I hear people criticizing anyone who comes forward about any kind of abuse, because we have very little to gain and everything to lose.
Right.
And the only thing we're trying to gain is our sanity and our healing and survival.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I'm just curious if you're still at the same church.
No, I tried to go back and I tried to think, well, my abuser's not going to run me off. And it was brutal because, the pastor didn't share with the congregation anything about it. So, and the doctor and his wife had been going there for, 20 years at least. And I'd been going there for 2 years. And the gossip mill was in full swing. In fact, that's what made the other victim come forward, is that someone started to gossip to her about me. She did not know me. Oh. But she knew because the same thing was going on with her. It's painful.
Yeah.
He was a psychiatrist and he told some of his buddies, and because I asked, because another one of my physicians was his close friend. And I said, what did he say about me? I want to know. And he said, you were delusional and you imagined it all. So, psychiatrists can play that mental illness card. They can say anything they want about you. I mean, he's a doctor.
Right.
My husband and I did find another church. We tried a couple and nothing has really been quite the same. And then COVID hit, and I have kind of used that as an excuse not to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just now kind of trying to work on that part of my healing. Not sure what God needs me to do there, not sure what I need to do there, not sure if I need to find another church or if it's okay that I never do, or if I watch it online, because I can't even watch it online. That tells me I have a lot of hurt and a lot of mistrust. And I think that's it, is that I don't know that I can trust enough again. I don't even know of a religious teacher, even if I were just like reading or listening to them, I just don't know who I trust now. Like that's been rocked.
I'm not religious at all. I think what you're saying, though, you do trust God.
I do trust God, but I don't know of any people that I trust to represent him.
100%.
And I want to find that because I want to keep learning. I want to learn about the Bible, and I have questions. I'm really struggling to know who is trustworthy. Not that they're a bad person, but just even, are they interpreting scriptures properly? And are they an ethical person? Both of those two things together.
The problem is exactly what we've been talking about, is that we all bring our own story to everything. A person is the problem. It's not God that's the problem, I guess, is where I'm going.
Church and God are two different things for me. And I just don't know if there is a church that I can trust.
Yeah.
I totally know, if anyone's thinking this, that there's good and bad in every group.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. And I get that people are fallible. But I'm talking about egregious type of sin. I'm talking about leaders that are corrupt and that are taking advantage of people for sport, like this person was, and like I know others are. And I just don't know now how to trust who's doing that and who isn't.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the pastor that one time slips up, and I'm not talking about that.
Right. I just hope you find what you're looking for, whatever that is.
Thank you. I am looking for different things that came with church, like, a community, a small community.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to study the Bible. And part of that has been COVID, and part of it's been my own resistance. But
yeah,
I'm looking for those things. And I don't know if those will ever be in the walls of a church again or not, but they still have value and they're needed for healing and growth. And I know that we're not meant to do life alone. And I have been more isolated since the abuse and then COVID together.
Yeah, I can see that. I feel isolated too. And COVID alone is messing everybody up.
Yeah. Consent is not possible in a relationship with an imbalance of power. So if you are, teacher, student, doctor, patient, therapist, client, child, adult, there is no way you can give consent. And that's just huge, because a lot of people don't apply that to adults. Another way that I've heard that said is that you can't say yes to anything if you can't also say no. And I love that, because these are situations like, for me, he was a religious leader and doctor and therapist. No, even culturally, we feel like we can't say no in those situations. If anything, we think we need to get through it and be polite and get out.
Yeah.
But stopping it and standing up, that just doesn't feel like a choice that we have. And then that's compounded when you've had abuse issues and you've been told you don't have rights like other people. I just want all victims to know that they're not alone and it's not their fault.
That's so sweet that you say that. One of the ladies I just aired, she was a victim of sexual abuse as a child, a lot of sexual abuse. And she said to me that it wasn't my fault. And I got so choked up. It's nice to keep hearing it.
You have to hear it over and over and over. I clung to those words in those early stages of my abuse. That's all I wanted to know. That's all I wanted to know. It was like it just kept my head above the water, just so I could survive long enough to start to climb out of the water. I don't care about anything else. That's just, I need those two questions answered.
Yeah.
And I think it was easier to accept I wasn't alone, and it takes a little longer to accept it wasn't my fault. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, so that people could see it, and really so people who don't get it can read it and be less judgmental. And I've had that response too. And it's been really awesome to hear. They've said, I do not relate to sexual abuse at all, but I kind of can see it. I can see now how I, as an adult, even could be manipulated like this. And that's huge because then they can have compassion.
Right.
Next time, this scenario comes up.
Well, thank you for writing the book and being brave.
Thank you.
I think that was just lovely. Thank you so much for this conversation. And I really do hope that you continue with your healing and your marriage continues to grow. And I wish good things for you.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. I'm doing the work.
I know. You have to keep at it. I can feel things like shame.
Yeah.
This always there waiting to come back if you let them.
So the girl that did just air talked about this retreat she went to called the Sapria Retreat. And it's free for victims who have been through child sexual abuse. And it's 4 days and it's free.
Oh, where is it?
Sapria.org. It's in Utah and Atlanta.
Sapria. I'll have to look that up because I've never heard of it.
I'm actually going at the end of the month and I'm really looking forward to it. And there's no more shame. There is just still this feeling. Well, I don't know what the feeling is, but I
think I know what you mean because I think I feel the same way. It's like I'm not feeling the shame, but like those incidences are all still sort of sit there.
Yeah.
And I have to it's almost like sometimes we have to expend more energy than others to kind of keep them at bay. I don't know how to explain it either.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean.
Yeah.
It's almost like a question mark still sits there. And I have to still say, no, and repeat it.
Right. It's not your fault. You have to keep hearing that. Like,
yes.
My sister said, why do you want to talk about it? I'm like, I do not want to talk about it, but I want to be free of it. And the only way to be free of it is to keep doing the work and getting better. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I realized I was 7 years old and I'm 54. I mean, it's a long time ago, but the feeling it left me with that carried on through most of my relationships as an adult, of allowing men to do things that they shouldn't have done, that has to be looked at.
And I agree with you. And I feel like speaking is one of the ways that gets it out and counteracts it. And then we have to keep doing that because I do feel like it kind of creeps back in. Yeah. And speaking out and hearing ourselves say out loud to someone else, that was not okay. And that was not your fault. That gives us what we need, but we need it continually.
Yeah. You just said it again and it chokes me every single time. It chokes me up.
And that means you still desperately need to hear it.
I know. Thank you for saying that again. I need to keep hearing it over and over. I know it wasn't my fault. I was 7 years old. I had no way to consent, but I didn't jump right up.
Yeah, neither did I. And I was 40 and I was 20. You are probably still in the baby stages with that belief. I mean, it was a full year that's all I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And maybe longer, a year or two, that's where I was just trying to convince myself of that. So it does take a very long time.
Okay. Thank you for saying that.
Be patient because you know it, but it doesn't take root. You've had 50 years of the opposite. It takes a little bit longer for something like that to take root and have enough days and experiences behind it to support it. And probably from when I wrote my book till now, it's been 9 years, and that's a long time. And I've done a lot of things to work towards it. And I would say, I'm just sort of maybe shifting.
Thanks so much. This was a beautiful conversation and it really helped me to hear it again. And it does help that others go through the same things. And I'm really happy that you're sharing your story because it really is helpful.
Yeah. And I hope the next time that kind of creeps in, that question mark creeps in for you, you just remember that I was 41 and it was absolutely not my fault.
That's beautiful. As an adult, I've gone through plenty of things and allowed myself to. And those were also not my fault because of what I believed about myself. I'm going to do the work and get there someday. I'm just going to be free of it all someday.
Yes, you will.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of See Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thanks for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.